So in this video we will answer the question, what are the benefits of going naturally aspirated or going turbocharged, and what should you do? First of all, to answer the end of the question, what should you do, it depends on what you want, and I will illustrate what are the benefits of both sides so you can decide for your own. Okay, naturally aspirated is an engine that is sucking in the air, so it's not forced with a turbocharger or supercharger as a forced induction system. A naturally aspirated engine is the simplest engine, so normally you get a more reliable engine to begin with, also less heat soak because the turbo suffers more from hot air, etc. Those are great benefits. However, there are also other things to consider. A naturally aspirated engine has normally a more revvy nature, especially if you have two engines, one turbocharged and one naturally aspirated, that produce the same horsepower. The naturally aspirated engine will rev to the stratosphere, so to say. So it needs to be very high revving, which also is a nice feature. It gives you a really racy feel and also a more racy sound. And this is especially so because also the turbo acts as a sort of a muffler, because the exhaust gases recirculate through the turbo, which also dampens their sound production, of course. So that's something to consider. And another thing to consider is that naturally aspirated engine, as I mentioned, there's two engines, both for example 2 liters, and one is naturally aspirated and the other one is turbocharged, and they both produce 200 horsepower. The naturally aspirated engine will produce approximately 200 Newton meters of torque, whereas a turbocharged engine with the same horsepower will produce between 280 and 320 horsepower. No, 280 and 320 Newton meters of torque. So it's approximately double the 50% more torque with the same horsepower. So there's also something to consider. And torque can have benefits, of course, because it's the pulling power that gives you a sense of acceleration, and also the ability to pull things a lot heavier, so those are benefits. But torque comes also sometimes with some drawbacks. So for example, you will have more wear and tear on your tires normally, and also you will have normally torque steer, especially with a front engine, front wheel drive type of powertrain. And torque steer is that the torque is twisting the axis, because it's so much torque on your front train, so to say, your front wheels, and also in bends it will easier push you towards the outside of the bend, so more of a understeer type of situation. Of course, there are things to help counter this, like limited slip differentials and other clever solutions. But still, that's something that's just there, and those tricks you can also apply to a naturally aspirated engine. So quite some benefits. Also the sensation could be a lot better. I drove, almost all my cars were naturally aspirated, and I really love that sound. But now I'm driving an Abarth, a Suzuki Swift Sport, and I'm not saying that those exhaust sounds are not as nice, only the nature is oftentimes a little bit less revvy, because they don't need stratospheric revs to reach their horsepower, because they also have a turbocharger. So now on to the turbocharged supercharged cars. The difference between supercharged and turbocharged is supercharged as a whine, and it is not propelled by the exhaust gases. It's just an additional belt, so it sips away power, and therefore also a little bit of fuel from the main engine to get the supercharger to force feed additional air into the engine, and therefore additional air, they can also produce additional power, because you need air and fuel to make power. So that being said, that's a very easy thing. It also does not have lag. It's also easy bolt-on the many naturally aspirated systems. But the drawback, you have additional fuel consumption, and oftentimes, normally the peak RPM power is waning with a supercharged engine, whereas with a turbocharged engine you can also have at peak revs still very strong power band due to the turbocharged. And also the other benefit of the turbocharged is that it is propelled by the exhaust gases. So normally a turbocharged engine of the same size will be a lot more frugal, so consuming less fuel than a supercharged engine of the same size. The supercharger will give you a little bit more torque and horsepower in the lower rev range, and the turbocharger more in the top rev range, a little bit less in the lower rev range, because still the exhaust gases need to be propelled to certain speeds. But there are many new systems, also hybrid turbos or twin turbos or even electric turbochargers that help to cope with that. An electric turbocharger is propelled by an electric system instead of your exhaust gases. So that is like a little bit of a supercharger system, but can also help. Another thing to consider is that if you want to tune your car, turbocharging is the best, even better than supercharging. With supercharging you can also make a smaller pulley and therefore have more power of the supercharger to suck in air and then blow it into your engine. So that's the thing that you can easily do. That's very cheap. But with a turbocharger, with the ECU, you can program also the turbo pressure. And that turbo pressure, if that increases, you get even more air force into the engine. So therefore also producing a lot more power. So it's not only that you have the engine characteristic that you can tune, but also the turbo characteristics, which makes it a very good deal. So why did I went from naturally aspirated engines for about this year I had my first own turbocharged engines. Last year the first, the Swift. This year the second, the Abarth. So in 2021 the first. And I started driving when I was 18. So that's 2007 to 2021 without a turbo. Because regulations, they are just completely ruining it in the Netherlands if you have a little bit more CO2 that your engine puts out when you travel, or at least theoretically, but because in practice sometimes a naturally aspirated engine can produce less CO2. And I also wanted to have the gains of once you try to adjust something in a turbocharged car, you have the amplification effect a lot more. So those are the main reasons. If I would not go for this turbocharged car, especially the Swift, I would have gone for the Mazda, because even Honda is now moving towards turbocharged cars. And in the past I really like the Honda cars because they have that stratospheric revving system. Dock VTEC, I really love that, and then after a while they even made eVTEC, Intelligent VTEC, also in the Civic Type R. But that's the reason why. And if not, I would go to Mazda, because Mazda still produces naturally aspirated engines quite a lot, and they also have some tricks on their own sleeve to decrease CO2, so therefore also additional taxes in the Netherlands. And they have quite big naturally aspirated engines in their cars, which I like. So that's it. Hope you like this short video. Found my car out. Me with my turbocharged car, the Suzuki Swift Sport Hybrid, and the Abarth. And I must say that it was 1997 that I started driving these cars, not 2007. So not these cars, but I started to drive my own cars. And that makes it quite a while, because then it is 24 years without turbocharged cars of my own. Hope you liked this video. Have a great day. Bye bye.